He already had power. He already had authority. Simple. Greed. Selfish. Pride. Again, what did his half brother say many times over in Ecclesiastes? It's vanity, vanity. All is a vanity. This is all the wisdom of Solomon. He was the smartest guy out there, right? He'd asked for wisdom, and God granted him that wisdom. And he said, at the end of all this, with all his 700 wives and concubines, he finally realized, you know what? All this was just vanity. Just vanity. I think at that time, Solomon, I don't want to get too far off on Solomon, but he was probably very sad in that assertion. Very sad that after all he had attained, all he had done. Now, he was still after God's heart and had a heart for God himself, but after all that, at the end of the whole thing, he just kind of said, oh. And I picture it as being a very sad moment as he looks back. So here you have his half-brother the same way. Again, some of his thoughts might have came from, don't be an Absalom, right? The story gives us in brief form from the scheme, the principles and the method of Absalom's conspiracy. Absalom was determined to overthrow his father's authority, which resulted from a sheer lust for power. Again, there's different lusts. There's lust, of course, sexual lust. There's lust of we call it the lust of the flesh. There's lust after food. There's lust after things. There's also lust after those intangible things, power. And that's what he had a lust for, which, of course, would have clearly resulted in what? More things, right? If you're king, you got more than if you're a prince. His plan is clearly seen in these verses. To win over the people by criticizing the king's administration, by gratifying them by showy establishment, profess zeal for justice. Again, if I were judge over these people, I would do right, to secure a good location for proclaiming his authority. He was at the gate, again, intercepting them as they came in to see the king. They never got a chance to go before the king. Might have been a long line, but he was there to intercept them every single time and yell out. He would call out to them and bring them into him, right? To secure a good location, claiming his authority, he would do so by a hypocritical profession of religion, which required him to go there when he wanted to go somewhere to offer his vows up. Again, it was just to subvert his plan even farther. He would scatter representatives throughout the land to champion his cause. It was a plan that almost worked, but at the end it backfired. You cannot go up against the plan of God, his man, or his church and be successful. Need proof? Take a look at Absalom. Again, so he was God. David was God's man. He was a man after God's heart. Tells it. Even with David's challenges, even with David's falls, listen, David's a good example for all of us to see that even though you mess up, God is still forgiving. If God wants you in the plan, he's going to have you in the plan. Don't be discouraged by a little trip on the journey, okay? God still wants you in the plan. David had his issues, right down to murder. God still had David in the plan, okay? Absalom prepared. Processions were often seen when a king or a man of authority was riding through the city. Absalom had the procession so he might look important to the people. He desired to be looked up to. He craved respect. He longed for people's mouths to gape with awe as he passed. He was probably dressed to the nines, riding the best horses or burros or whatever. Simply put, he was a conceited, selfish, proud brat who had a false estimate of his own worth. Isn't that true? Sometimes pride will make you think more of yourself than you actually are. I've been guilty of pride. I've been guilty of pride for sure. Just then and there, God says, oh, no, you're not. Sets me back on solid ground, back in reality, a reality check, I call it. So, if it could have been brought for what he was worth and sold, for what he thought he was worth, he could have made a fortune. Pride always reduces the value of a person. It says here he's David's favorite son. In actuality, I found nowhere where it said he was his favorite son. What I did find was a place where he was mourning for him. He was mourning for him, and he was after his death. Oh, now I gave you the end of the story. I'm sorry, but anyway, he was mourning for him, right? So what he said was, Absalom, oh Absalom, my son, my son. I looked. I could not find anywhere where it said he said it was his third son. It did not say he was his favorite son. So you see that, that's conjecture, all right? Which is a fancy word to say somebody thought it was, but it weren't. So Absalom was just a son, but David mourned. David probably would have mourned for any of his sons. I mean, he was that kind of God gave him that spirit. Pride always plays a part in selfish ambition. Pride says, no one can do it like me. I'm better suited for the job. That was his attitude. He thought he was the best man for the job. And again, Proverbs, oh, there you go. There's Solomon again, right? Proverbs in 16:18 said, pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Solomon said it best. Maybe, and this is side notes, maybe he was thinking about his half-brother. They had different mothers, of course. And it's interesting because David had all these sons, right? If you get in and you do some research, all David's sons came from all different people, all right? So, obviously, they were all stepchildren, in a sense. Most of them, anyway. Absalom was a man of no character long before it was ever exposed. So, this is true. You know, the actions are usually post the attitude, all right? So what I'm saying is Absalom always probably eyed David from the time he was a very young man to, I want that. I want that position. So the attitude comes before the actions. So here we have his attitude. And you find that as well, you know, the sin starts as a thought. Whether it be murder, whether it be robbery, whether it be coveting anything, whether it be, you know, any of those things, any sin before God starts as a thought. It's when you bring that thought into action that it becomes sin. If you dwell on it too long, there's the problem. There's the problem. And I'm not going to say Brother Bill Wyatt's favorite saying. Does everybody know what that is? Give it to us, the whole thing. You can't stop a bird, but you can't stop a bird from landing, but you can stop him from making a nest. So, there, I said it again. So here you go. Absalom rose up early. Sometimes being a crook takes work. Sometimes being dishonest takes a little work. Well, Absalom got up early in the morning to make sure he was positioned by the gate. He had to get up, get his fancy princely clothes on, get his attitude. I imagine he checked his hair, you know, and everything else. Got out there looking good, so he could influence people. So he rose up early. It says, rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate, right there. He was like greeting people as they come in, you know. And for all they knew, they probably thought he was acting on David's behalf. Nothing could be further for the truth. He knew what he wanted. He knew how to get it, even though it was through questionable and deceitful. All right, he worked very hard on his plan to usurp his father, and worse, to kill him. So poor David. I mean, here he's got Saul after him. He's got his own son after him. I mean, you can understand why David spent so much time. A lot of the Psalms, David was fearing for his life. David was running and pleading for God throughout a lot of the Psalms. And just when he get into, you know, praising God and thanking God and telling God how wonderful he was and all that, he turned right around the next Psalm. Oh, Lord, you know, help me, you know. Look down on your servant. The gate would be that which led to the palace, where the king would give audiences and administer justice. At the gate of the city, the elders were judges, and matters could be tried and solved. Yet if one was not satisfied, guess what? You could go up and go to the next level, which I guess the last level is the king, you know. And they could appeal to a higher authority, that being the king. Absalom desired to talk to those on their way to the king. In other words, interceptor, okay? He knew he would show interest by asking what city and tribe they were from, and then listen to their complaint. Absalom had plenty of time to listen, for in showing concern, he was gaining access to their hearts. So, when I used to have a customer that was upset at Home Depot, well, it doesn't matter what variety of manager I was. We had 3 or 4 different managers. Some were over installations, which was always a place to get some attention. Some were over just customer issues or returns or products, or it could have been anything. The thing I found when I would go to a customer's house over an installation, was try to find some common ground and start talking to them. In other words, kind of get in with them, if you want to call it that. I would try to pacify them by just kind of being a buddy, so to speak. See something that they had that maybe you had, or talk about something in their house or a vehicle or whatever. Anything to kind of get in with them. Well, Absalom was an expert at that. He would get in, he'd start talking to them. Oh, what city are you from? And he would gain their trust. He'd be a friend. He'd be, so they could go to the king, but they never got to the king a lot of times with Absalom. The king was, if you want to call it this, the king was kind of the supreme court of the day. If you weren't happy with the lower judicial courts, you could go to the Supreme Court. And the supreme, of course, was the king. That's the highest you could go. After that, that was it. What the king said, there was no appealing. It was there. That was it. It was his judgment. Absalom would inform all that were coming to the king of their arguments and grievances, that they were substantial, that they needed to be heard, yet there was no one appointed by the king to hear them, as to imply the king really doesn't care. Well, actually, the king was backed up, okay? The king had a backlog, all right? You'd have all these people outside the gate. It'd be like if you called somebody, and what Absalom was saying is, what you hear a lot when you call somebody now. I call my doctor's office, and it's like a lesson in frustration. I mean, so what's the first thing you hear? Your call is very important to us. Baloney. It was very important to us. You would hire some people to answer the phone. And so I got a hold of one lady the other day, and I said, what's going on? Come on, I've been on this for 20 minutes just to wait to be heard. Just to wait for somebody to pick up and tell me they're going to transfer me to somebody else who will pick up for a while. It's just, we normally have, what did she say, 50 or 60 calls in the queue. And I was just kind of frustrated. I said, okay. What I wanted to say, don't you think that's a problem? You got 50 or 60 calls in the queue? Well, the king had 50 or 60 calls in the queue. That's the point I'm getting at here. He probably was backed up. So Absalom was telling him the king doesn't think it's important because you couldn't get in to see him. That's what I kind of read here. It was here that Absalom becomes a sower of discord. He immediately seizes the opportunity to put doubt and uncertainty toward David in the heart of this man, in turn causing division. It was simply what Absalom implied. It wasn't may not been true, but he implied that you're not important enough for the king to hear you. But here we go. In Proverbs 6:16 and 19, we read where there are 6 things that God hates. Yea, 7 are an abomination. Verse 19 reveals us the 7th, and that soweth discord among brethren. Why would anybody want to take part in that which God considers an abomination? The conduct of a man who destroys harmony and unity amongst those that should live together in brotherly affection is utterly diabolical. So the 7th, that last thing, he goes on to say what they are. All of them are. And Solomon, here we go. Here's Solomon again, right? In Proverbs, you see a lot of Proverbs being referred to about Absalom, because again, he was referring to the instance of Absalom, not necessarily Absalom by name, but you see a lot of things that fit in to Absalom. So, with said that, I'm going to flash over real quick, and you're welcome to go there because, again, everything that I read, I definitely want to back up with the Word of God. So, Absalom, where art thou, Absalom, Absalom, Absalom? There we go. So, there are 6 things. We're going to read from chapter 6, starting at verse 16. These 6 things does the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. A proud look. Who are we looking about? Absalom. I think this guy's got them all, okay? I think he's pulled a royal flush, if you would. All right? A lying tongue. I'm thinking Absalom. hands that shed innocent blood. He wanted to kill David. He did not get to do it, but he wanted to. A heart which devises wicked imaginations. There you are, Absalom. Feet that be swift in running to mischief. Absalom. A false witness that speaketh lies. There he is again. And he that soweth discord among the brethren. So I see there where it's not just the abomination that he is guilty of, but he seems to be guilty of just about all of these things that the Lord hated. So, moving on. How did Solomon know these things? Very easy. He asked for wisdom. God gave it to him, okay? So that's how Solomon, I believe, knew a lot of these things. How did Solomon know what was an abomination unto God? How did Solomon know the things that God hated? Well, he asked for wisdom. God gave it to him. So here you go. The conduct of a man destroys harmony. Now, this is the opposite of Psalms 133:1. Brother Jamie, if you could you tell me what 133:1 says? Has something to do with a business meeting. There you go. Complete opposite. Good for brothers to dwell together in unity, but one that sows discord among brethren. I think that's the polar opposite of this, okay? So what should be done with and for such character to cause division? Well, you know what God says. God hates it, so that's damnation as far as I can see. Romans 16:17, now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine ye have learned, and avoid them. Well, he didn't give them a chance. Absalom the accuser. So we're going through, just like we went through those bad spirits last week, we're going to go through Absalom's bad habits, if you want, or bad actions, or bad methods he used. The court accuses the king of being negligent and having no concern. If he really cared, then there would be a man deputed, which I would call it in our day deputized, all right, of the king to hear them. There was a right way and a wrong way to deal with the accusations. Too often we are guilty of handling them the wrong way, doing nothing about them and just letting them go. Going down a little bit, the church is never to receive accusations against the ministry without going the Bible route. 1 Timothy 5:19, against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. There is to be concrete proof and witnesses to go along with the accusation, not hearsay or just words. So here you have Absalom giving hearsay, giving untruths. Those things were not true. Furthermore, the accusation is not to be broadcast all over. What do we call that? We call that gossip. Gossip. We call it an accusation. It may be not even an accusation, just saying things unkind or whatever. There's a good kind of gossip. Sister Patsy's a wonderful person. She sat behind me for the last couple of years, and I love her to death. That's a good gossip, all right? There's other kinds of gossip, and that's what we're talking about here. Do not spread gossip. Accusations, gossip, same thing. Don't do it. There's a problem which certainly needs to be discussed and learned to be dealt with properly. A teacher can make false accusation against someone in the class to make the point. I'm not going to do that. I made a good accusation. So, and you wonder why in court we have court recorders? So they get everything down. That's the thing about witnesses, okay? Even in law enforcement, there's got to be witnesses, or at least incriminating evidence. Oh, that I were made judge. He insinuates there's a flaw in the king's administration. In other words, this government is weak. This government has some chinks in the armor. This government is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So here you go. He's telling them that the king should be more in tune with the power. When in reality, Absalom was getting in tune with the people in a disrespectful and, of course, a negative way. The backbiter. A backbiter is one that slanders or takes action against another. Backbiting and whispering are basically one and the same, only the whisperer tries to do it more secretly. Both means to slander, defame, derail against, to speak evil of. Backbiters and whisperers tend to always be liars, spreading falsehoods. Absalom the whisperer. A whisperer is a secret calumniator. Why can't you just use words an old man can understand? One who makes malicious or knowingly false statements about another. Some might say he never did come right out and talk badly about the king. He did, in a sense, insinuate, though. So the insinuation was, oh, if I were, judging, I would, if I could judge all you people, I would do it this way. So he's insinuating the king's not a good judge. Not saying it in direct words. Why? He doesn't want to incriminate himself. He's very careful. He's sly. He is that serpent. He is that serpent that just slithers through, causing hate and disrespect, but not really saying it out loud. He was a whisperer because all this was said behind the king's back. His intentions were malicious. If he had a problem with the administration of the king, the right thing would have been done to approach him. But since he was a man that lacked character, he whispered. He was a backbiter. You can rest assured there's always a character flaw. Some person whispers and backbites. Obiad's handshakes, kisses. Absalom had mastered the art of politics. He knew how to manipulate people and draw them to certain conclusions. I'm not going to go there and talk about the politicians of our day. And I guess I just did. But anyway. So he always seemed to be one to give and never ask for a return. Yet that was not the case at all. He was giving out, I guess you'd call it help. He was giving out of himself. But he was gaining something in return, too. He was gaining loyalty, and he was, again, undermining, which, of course, we read earlier, is to subvert or to wash away power from underneath. The king, he knew all the time his badgering of the king was taking root in the heart of the people. He was just an underminer, like I said. He was subvert. He knew not only how to make people feel obliged to him, but he had made them want to love him as well. Yeah, he would stand out there and says he would kiss their hand and he would welcome and a handshake and everything else. I tell new managers when they come to the Home Depot store oftentimes, I said, listen, you want to be successful, don't go in trying to change everything at once. Don't go in trying to upset the apple cart. You know nothing about the apple cart yet. I used to tell them, listen, for the first 2 weeks, you should be shaking hands and kissing babies. That's politics. In other words, keep your eyes open, get around, walk around, get to know people. Well, he was an expert at shaking hands and kissing babies. That's what he did. He walked around, he got to shake hands, got to know them. Hey, I'm Absalom, If you need anything, come see me. Here's my card. Probably had little cards that said Absalom, counselor of the king. He's passing them out and everything else. So he was building his case. He was building his popularity, He was a politician of his day. There was no doubt about it. This man was a politician. Some politicians stand on integrity. Some stand on values. Absolutely not this case. This guy stood on none of those things. He was just out to get what he could. Again, some of the politicians of our days. He knew all the time his badgering of the king was taking root in the heart of the people. Remember that, okay? He was building loyalty. And let's face it, what are votes? Votes are building loyalty, right? He knew not only to make people feel obliged to him, but he wanted them to make him love him again, building loyalty. He wasn't identified as a wolf in sheep's clothing because the people could not see the beguiler under the smiler. I like that. Politics has no place in the house of God, and such people should be marked and dealt with carefully. Listen, do I agree with everything that goes on in this church or any church? No, absolutely not. But there's a difference in not agreeing with it and using that disagreement to undermine. Why do you think? We said it many times before. There's a Church of God of Prophecy. There's a First Church of God. There's a Church of God of Cleveland, Tennessee, of Indiana. There's, you see, let's go one better. There's a Southern Baptist Convention, but then there's some that even it broke off of that. But how many Baptist churches do you pass? If you're on the highway, go down a country road. Where I go up there in Georgia, Millwood, Georgia, a little stick town. There's nothing open there anymore. The post office is now our hunting camp. The gas station closed and opened 3 or 4 times since I've been going there. The little convenience store down the street isn't even in that town anymore. So What you have, though, is you have a sign with back to church this way, church that way, 3 arrows this way. There's like 5 or 6 churches in a town that's not even a town. So you have so much division, and we talk about this many times. How did that happen? Well, easy. More than likely, it started with disagreements. More than likely, it started with an argument. More than likely, it started with somebody's feelings getting hurt. Sorry your feelings got hurt. It's just that's part of life. Feelings will get hurt. Doesn't mean you have to quit. I'm sure if most of these people that had these divisions, and again, preaching, not teaching here for a second, if most of these people had these divisions, if they sat down and talked about it for a while and got together, they probably would have worked it out. But unfortunately, what happens? Emotions happen. People get more and more upset and more worked up, and people imagine things that aren't even true. They imagine things that aren't even true. So that's how division happens. Well, Absalom was putting into the thoughts of these people things that weren't even true. And that's how he was dividing. So Absalom pays a vow. This is how he gains his power. Now we're into the part where he went and actually executed, if you would, his plan. He had laid the foundation. So we see that a lot. He laid the foundation of the hatred toward the king, of the separation of the state, if you would. He'd gotten that all set. He was where he thought it was going to be a great thing, and it was. It worked out. Worked out for him. He raised up an army to go to war. So here we go. Absalom, although this malicious overthrow he acted through, he was a God-fearing, acted as though he was a God-fearing man. He wasn't. He was just using that, I want to go pay a vow before God, as another tool in his scheme here. He went through the rituals of religion, yet his heart was void of true love of God. He loved self and no one else. In the heart of every troublemaker, there's a lack of love for God. Again, if we started praising God and thanking God, there'd be less time to complain. The cause of Christ and the church. You can never say you love God when you don't love your brother. I was going to play this again. I played it a long time ago, but I just didn't get to it. And to be honest with you, time constraints here. There's a song. I listen to a little bit of, don't tell anybody, bluegrass kind of stuff. That's what I love all the instruments. There's a song, and I did play it here once. If you don't love your neighbor, then you don't love God, by Rhonda Vincent. And it's true, and it talks about, if you don't give him time of day, if you don't help him, if you don't love your neighbor, you can say you love God, but you don't love God. Love that song. So all the while waiting for an opportunity to kill their influence, tear down their reputation, even mar the character of course, the brothers and sisters of the church are talking about here in the Lord, but we're talking about David. How often is religion used to cover a man's sins and evil intentions? There's no clearer proof of a devilish spirit working in a man than when he uses religion, namely Christianity, for vile and selfish purposes. Christ rightfully pronounced woes on such men and called them hypocrites. What's a hypocrite? Hypocrite's something that says one thing and is doing another. Okay, the old saying, walk the walk. If you're talking the talk, walk the walk. So this is definitely a just description. Absalom sent spies. We're getting down here, getting toward the end. Absalom made sure he had those who championed his cause. The tragedy about men like Absalom, even though they are not men of character, is that they always seem to muster a following. The church must always be put on guard for men like Absalom. These spies were guilty of carrying out what was against the will of God. Again, David was God's man. He was the man that God set up. Even, let's face it, he's the son of Jesse, the distant relative, if you would, of Christ. So God had a plan for David. Absalom wasn't in that plan. Absalom was jealous, probably. He's jealous of everything David had. He's jealous of his power more than anything. Absalom has his spies carry out his agenda while he paid his vows and went through the ritual. So he went to Hebron to pay vows, but in reality it was theirs to solidify his power. So this verse proves they went in simplicity. The people are sometimes too gullible. Again, those people that went there with him, if you look back in verse 11. Absalom went 200 with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in simplicity, and they knew not anything. So these were pawns, if you would, in Absalom's game. Some were willing to try a man without hearing his case, pronounce him guilty as charged, and certainly time should not be wasted. So let the execution begin. Yet if the tables were reversed, they would want someone to give them the benefit of the doubt. In other words, Absalom was ready to carry out his plan. He didn't want to wait, and he had some innocent people to help him out. At the end, he raised an army, a very large army, to go against David. This did not excuse them. They were part of it, so therefore they were punished as well. Probably many of them, if not all of them, died in the war. We're not to be naive and gullible. Prove the spirits. Read the Word of God. If someone tells you something that's in the Word of God, look it up, okay? These guys, these 200, did not research Absalom. They followed him blindly in, so they were held accountable. The conspiracy was strong, it says. Notice the word that the Holy Ghost uses, conspiracy, an unlawful alliance or confederacy, treason. What a strong word. You know, treason, in days of war, or in the military, treason can be, in a time of war, punishable by death. And at least into jail time other than that. Okay, so it's a very serious crime that he's committing. The success of the godless rebels shows us there was a lack of true theocratic feeling in the people. When they abandoned the king's government, they were guilty of opposition to the government of God, because, again, God set it up. His insurrection was successfully enacted, but it was short-lived. Yes, the conspiracy was strong, its success was great, swift and surprising, and temporary. And there came a messenger, we're going to 2 Samuel 15, 13 through 14, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, for we shall not escape from Absalom. Or we will not escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. So David's saying right there, let's get out of here. If we're gone, his concern was for the city. His concern was for the city of Jerusalem. He said, let's get out of here. Because if we don't get out of here, he's going to come in here, and he's going to smite the city. In other words, he's going to kill everyone. He's going to kill innocents that have no part of an army or anything else. So David wanted to get away, and he did. He was successful in getting away. I'm going to go ahead now, flip it over. Got a few minutes here, and I just wanted to go over a couple things. So, Mr. Absalom. Go way back here to 2 Samuel, chapter 18. I do like going back sometimes, you guys. It's not because I want to lengthen out the lesson or anything like that, because and sometimes, they'll give you a continuous bunch of verses, which I like. They'll give you, 10, 12, 15 verses together. Other times they do like I did here. They broke it into 2 here and 2 there and 2 there, whatever. So, David numbered the people that were with him. I'm just going to read some of the verses here, though, but this sets the scene for Absalom's demise, if you would. All right? Because I think it's important to finish this lesson up with what the penalties were, what the price that Absalom paid. It was pretty weird. David numbered the people that were with him, in chapter 18 of 2 Samuel, and said captains of thousands and captains of hundreds. So now we see David has not just got those servants and stuff with him that flee Jerusalem. David has raised up a mighty army. Why? Because he's God's man, right? God's man will always persevere. All right? And David sent forth a third of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third of the part under the hand of Abishai and the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third part under the hand of Attai the Gittite. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. Now David's a little older. David's not that strong, big, mighty king now. David's a little older, gotten up in years. And here's why they didn't want him to go. I think this was admirable of his army. But the people answered, The people answered. David's got a following now. David's a powerful leader of this following, right? And thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us, neither if half of us die, will they care for us. In other words, they're not after us. If we don't make this, if this doesn't happen, then no big deal, okay? But if you're there, listen. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, now it is better for thou to secure us out of the city. So in other words, David, you're more important as a leader. We don't want to risk you now. We need you. So you stay back. And the king said, what seemeth you best I will do. Going down a little bit, the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. Even then. And you remember how David's heart was towards Saul? It was real similar, wasn't it? David's heart towards Saul. David had Saul. He had him. He could have run him through. But David, being a man of God, his heart was different. His heart was not after I want to say, revenge. Even with his son Absalom, his heart, even though this guy had taken his kingdom, tried to anyway, and it was after his life, and obviously made life miserable for more people than just David. David cared about the people. We saw that when he fled the city, so Absalom wouldn't destroy and kill everyone there, right? And the king commanded Joab, okay, deal gently with him. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. Moving down to 7. When the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David, and there was a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. A slaughter of 20,000 men. David divided. David was still the general of an army. So you saw where he divided his army up. A third here, a third here, and a third here. Hey, if he's got a third coming at you, that means he's got you flanked on both sides. All right? A very, very classic military maneuver. He had him. And he destroyed 20,000. But here's the interesting part. I had to read into this. There was a great slaughter. For the battle was there scattered over the face of all the country. And the wood, listen, the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. What are you talking about? The wood. There's different trains of thought in this. Again, you know what a commentary is, right? It's one man's interpretation. What's another commentary? It's another man's interpretation. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. The interpretations are usually based on a lot of research, though. I mean, it's not just some guy putting down random thoughts. A lot of research. In the case of Absalom being his favorite son, there's nowhere in the Bible it says that. Not one place could I find. I don't think I'm wrong there. I spent some time. It was all drawn in conjecture over when he's mourning the death of Absalom. That's what it was. Oh, Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. And he even says, oh, that I would have died. So he thought very highly of, but we don't know if he thought very highly of any of the others that way. But it doesn't mean he was his favorite son. However, it's stated that way. And the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. So I looked into this. How could that be? So there's two trains of thought on this. One is they were we read several times in the Bible that during these wars, right, God's army was so overwhelming, either in person or perceived, or God made them, the enemy, think they were so overwhelmed. He would have, it's just like he says, look, the servant didn't see the army. And like I said, look, open their eyes. So there's this huge army, and a lot of times it scatters the people, all right? When the lepers went into the camp was empty. So God's people and God at different times has scattered the enemy. Here, 20,000 of them died. The rest of them were running for their lives, I'm guessing, okay? So they run. So how did the wood slaughter more of them than the sword? So one line of thought on that was either fell into pits or on sticks. They tripped over stumps. They were so panic-stricken, so horrified, that they ran just all through the woods. And it was in a woods, a deep woods. So They impaled themselves. They fell over, maybe they fell over cliffs, whatever. But in the second line of thought, which I think is probably not, I don't know, I would go with the first line, is they were devoured by beast. That's the second line of thought that was given on the commentaries I looked at. They lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, devoured the people. I would think more of the panic of running through the woods. But that claim more than the sword, it says they slaughtered 20,000. So how many were killed falling on stumps? You know, impaling themselves, falling into cliffs, into quicksands, into rivers, who knows? But more than 20,000, we assume, because it says so. It says it, I believe it. Died because of other means. So, 10 men. So, Joab ran, his son ran. Absalom ran, and here's the tragic part. We often see this. Remember what happened to Judas, right? Listen to this. And Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under a thick bough of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. And a certain man saw it and told Joab, and behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an oak. It goes on to say that Joab asked them what happened, and they told him, right? And I thought I should receive 10,000 shekels in my hand, yet would I not put forth my hand against the king's son. Why? Because the king had said, no one, please touch my son, Absalom, right? So we go on, otherwise I would have wrought falsehood against my own life. Finally it says, Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. In other words, I ain't wasting no more time. And he took 3 darts in his hand. Some say it was just pieces of wood, spears, and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bear Joab's honor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. And they took Absalom and cast him in a great pit in the wood, and laid a very great heap of stones upon him, and all Israel fled, everyone to his tent. It don't pay to go against the man of God. And we are out of time.